Allan Aguirre with your Incorruptible 2-minute warning for Friday. Yeah, for this week. And since it's Friday, we're going to go into Friday mode. This is what we call Friday mode, where we can have a little chat. And hello to anybody that might be out there. I don't know. I just said hello. Hey, we have been talking about sonship, the inheritance of sonship. Just little things like that, little tidbits, nothing, grandiose. And this is going to be short. It won't be very long. I thought we would talk a little bit about how God is a father to the fatherless. And that's significant to me. So my mother and biological father, they got a divorce when I was 2. And so I didn't have a father. My grandfather actually stepped into the role of father for about 3 years or so. Funny because I ended up doing the same thing for my grandchildren for a short amount of time. And then she remarried when I was like 5-ish. And so I was raised by a stepfather. Now, we didn't use the term stepfather, and I never really considered him a stepfather. Well, I'm not going to go there, but I didn't consider him a stepfather. I never called him stepdad, or so. I always called him dad. And then my mom and him had their own son when I was 7. So we didn't do the whole stepdad thing. He was, I basically, I just considered him my dad, right? And then that relationship became incredibly strained around the time I turned 12. And it was really strained for 3 to 4 years, like bad. So bad that they put me on an airplane on a one-way ticket to live with a missionary uncle in Central America under false pretenses. That's how strained the relationship was. And but it got fixed. The relationship was repaired when I was in my let's say my late 20s, early 30s. When I was in my 30s, the relationship was repaired. And my dad was my dad said that his biggest failure in life was his family. And he always wanted to be a family. I mean, he was a family man. I mean, he was all about family. And he showed that with our children, his grandchildren. And he was all about that. But he also knew that he did a horrible job as a father. I mean, that's what he told me. But anyway, so I was raised by a stepdad. I didn't have a biological father in my life. And then the biological father I did have, he died when I was 12. I never met him. I mean, like I said, they divorced when I was 2. So in essence, that would be considered fatherless. Orphans are also considered fatherless. I think orphans are considered fatherless more than what I'm talking about. And it's interesting because Jesus had the same situation. He didn't have an earthly father. He had an earthly stepfather in Joseph. And it's suggested that Jesus didn't go into his public ministry until after Joseph died. I don't know, but that's been suggested. I didn't suggest it. And so I can identify with that. I can identify with not having a biological father. I didn't have like a father deal in my life. And when you most need one is preteens and teens, and I didn't have one. My uncle that I did move, the uncle that I did move to, I lived with him and his family for about 3 years. That was the closest thing I had to a father. And I've talked about that, and I've shared about that, and how that impacted my life, and I'm incredibly grateful for my uncle and my aunt for taking me in and being a father, mother to me in those very challenging years. I mean, because I had just come into Christendom and all that type of thing, and so I can identify with that. And what's as cosmic as the king of the universe is, as cosmic as the concept of a supreme being and a God is, he has a heart for, not only does he have a heart for humans, he has a heart for man, right? Who is man that you're mindful of him, or the son of man that you would send him to be with man, to visit him? Little passages like that. But in Psalm 68:4, it says that he's the father of the fatherless. And he's all about the fatherless. He's all about the widow, the sojourner, the orphan. I mean, he is all about that. And in Psalm 10:14, it says that he's the helper of the fatherless. And in Psalm 146:9, he upholds the fatherless. In Exodus 22, verses 22 through 24, says, "You shall not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. If you do mistreat them, and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will burn, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widows, and your children fatherless." You don't mess with it, man. And if you look back in history, I mean, movies depict children being mistreated, orphans being mistreated. I think of Annie, right? Orphan Annie. And I mean, all throughout history, orphans, the fatherless, are mistreated. They're mistreated by men of wealth. They're mistreated by the church. They're mistreated by, they're just mistreated. A lot of movies, a lot of books, it's been depicted in so many various ways, the mistreatment of children, of the fatherless, of orphans. And God doesn't like that. He hates it. He hates it to the extent that he will turn if you do that, it says here that he will turn your children into fatherless children and your wife's widow, because he'll take you out. It says that. It says it right there in Exodus 22, I will kill you with the sword. That's hate speech. With our twisted society today, saying what I just said is considered hate speech. But I didn't write it. I'm just telling you what the Bible says. And if the Bible's hateful, well, you're clueless. Anyway, in Deuteronomy 10:18, it says that God executes justice for the fatherless and the widow, and loves the sojourner, giving him food and clothing. So instead of thinking that the Bible's full of hate or that this is hate speech, you should be siding on the side of the poor. I mean, right? Isn't that what the liberals do? They side with the disenfranchised. I think I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to make this political thing, even though this is political. This is absolutely political. But God says he executes justice for the fatherless, giving him food and clothing. Deuteronomy 16 mentions the fatherless during the feasts, and how during the feasts, we are supposed to take care of the fatherless and the sojourner and the widow. Allowing for provision and justice for the fatherless is taught in chapters 24, 26, and 27 of Deuteronomy. Proverbs 23, 10 and 11 says, "Do not move an ancient landmark or enter the fields of the fatherless, for their Redeemer is strong. He will plead their cause against you." And in the prophets, we see how Israel would once again disobey and go against the Father's instructions regarding the fatherless. You'll see that in like Jeremiah and Isaiah. Now, to wrap this thing up, I want to continue with Proverbs 23 regarding the sonship aspect of it. Because, see, we're talking about the inheritance of sonship. We're talking about sonship. We're talking about, earlier this week, we're talking about the spirit of adoption. It's a spiritual thing, regardless of whether you're a Jew or a Gentile. It doesn't matter. What we're involved with when it comes to faith, when it comes to being grafted into the commonwealth of Israel, grafted into Israel, into that olive tree, whether if you're a Gentile, but then even if you are Jewish, the concept of Messiah, and there's a spirit of adoption. And the reason why I'm talking about the spirit of adoption is because the majority of us, and you are Gentiles. So you're grafted in. You've been adopted. There's the spirit of adoption piece that comes into play when it comes to your faith journey, your faith walk. And it's a spiritual thing. It has nothing to do with physical genealogy. It is absolutely spiritual. And so because it is spiritual, there's a responsibility piece. There's a piece. You have the responsibility of understanding that it's spiritual and that you've been grafted in to the olive tree, and that's a spiritual thing. And we're not talking replacement theology, because I'm not about that. But I bring the spiritual piece up because in the rest of Proverbs 23 pretty much talks about our role or our responsibilities as sons. Okay, that's where we're going right now. Apply your heart to instruction and your ear to words of knowledge. The fear, right? So that should automatically be firing your memory regarding the beginning of wisdom. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, and that's how we begin this trek of knowledge, which is what? Actually walking in obedience to the Torah. If you read Proverbs 1-10, that's what it'll tell you. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. If you strike him with the rod, you will save his soul from Sheol. Again, we just took the physical into the spiritual. My son, if your heart is wise, we're talking about the responsibilities of sonship. My son, if your heart is wise, my heart too will be glad. My inmost being will exult when your lips speak what is right. Let not your heart envy sinners, but continue in the fear of the Lord all the day. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the beginning of wisdom is the beginning of knowledge in keeping God's Torah. This is just the way it is. Continue in the fear of the Lord all the day. Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. Hear, my son, and be wise, and direct your heart in the way. The way. Michael Burks, I can see that you're there. The way was a term in the Jesus movement. The one way, the way, and then this was, remember Keith Green's first album. He's doing this because that was the whole thing going on with the Jesus movement. The way is an actual Old Testament concept, and it's walking in God's way. Walking the way was walking the path of Torah, walking the path of keeping God's instruction, his covenants, his commandments. It's an Old Testament thing. Hear, my son, and be wise, and direct your heart in the way. Be not among drunkards or among gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and slumber will clothe them with rags. Listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old. These are the responsibilities of sonship. Buy truth and do not sell it. Buy wisdom, instruction, and understanding. Again, read the first 10 Proverbs. The father of the righteous will greatly rejoice. He who fathers a wise son will be glad in him. Let your father and mother be glad. Let her who bore you rejoice. And to wrap this puppy up, my son, give me your heart and let your eyes observe my ways. This is your 2-minute warning.
The views and opinions expressed during our broadcasts are solely those of the broadcast producers, hosts, and/or guests, etc., and are not necessarily the views or opinions of the Travelogue Network, its sponsors, or affiliates.